Israeli soldiers in retreat. Trump alarmed by the situation. The images emerging from Lebanon last night tell a story that the Western media establishment desperately wants to suppress but cannot contain forever. Israeli soldiers, the supposedly invincible forces of the Middle East's dominant military power, fled in shameful retreat across the sea, abandoning their wounded comrades to the fighters of Hezbollah, who had sprung a devastating ambush that destroyed at least one helicopter and surrounded the survivors. Meanwhile, in Washington, Donald Trump posts increasingly unhinged messages on Truth Social, desperately grasping for any excuse to declare victory and extract himself from a quagmire that grows deeper with each passing day. The man who promised a quick and decisive war against Iran has discovered that he has trapped himself in a conflict he cannot win, cannot control, and cannot escape without humiliating acknowledgement of failure. Hey everyone, I'm Michael Harris, geopolitical and military analyst, and you're watching my channel. What I'm about to share with you reveals the catastrophic unraveling of the American-Israeli military campaign against Iran and its regional allies, the retreat of Israeli soldiers from Lebanese territory, the destruction of American defense systems across the Gulf, the coordination between Iran and its allies that Washington never anticipated. All of these developments paint a picture of strategic failure that Trump's desperate social media posts cannot obscure. Before we examine how completely the situation has deteriorated for American and Israeli forces, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Drop a comment with your thoughts as we go through this together, and share this video with everyone who needs to understand the reality that Western media refuses to broadcast. Now, let's examine why Israeli soldiers are retreating and why Trump is genuinely alarmed. Trump had absolutely never imagined in his worst nightmares that Iran would strike American military forces, strategic American interests, and regional allies with such devastating power and such implacable determination. The assumption underlying the entire American assault was that Iran would crumble under the weight of shock and awe, that its missiles would prove ineffective against sophisticated American and Israeli defenses, that its regional allies would abandon it when confronted with overwhelming force. Every single one of these assumptions has proven catastrophically wrong, and now Trump faces consequences he never anticipated and cannot control. The ambush that Hezbollah executed against Israeli forces in the Bay Valley last night deserves detailed examination because it represents a turning point in the regional conflict. Israeli special forces attempted to infiltrate under cover of darkness using 3 helicopters to insert teams into what they believed would be a vulnerable position. Instead, they flew directly into a trap that Hezbollah fighters had prepared with meticulous care. At least 1 helicopter was shot down, its wreckage now providing a trophy that Hezbollah has documented for the world to see. The survivors who reached the ground found themselves immediately surrounded by fighters who had positioned themselves perfectly to cut off any retreat. What happened next reveals the psychological collapse that is spreading through Israeli military ranks. Other Israeli soldiers present at the scene, rather than attempting to rescue their surrounded comrades, fled shamefully by sea, abandoning their brothers in arms to whatever fate awaited them. This is not the behavior of a confident military force assured of its superiority. This is the behavior of troops who have lost faith in their mission, their leadership, and their chances of survival. The vaunted Israeli military spirit, forged in decades of conflict and celebrated in countless propaganda narratives, cracked visibly in the Lebanese night. The circumstances of this ambush suggest something that should terrify Israeli military planners. Hezbollah knew exactly where and when the Israeli forces would attempt their infiltration. The fighters were positioned not randomly, but precisely where they needed to be to spring a trap that would be inescapable. This level of intelligence suggests either a catastrophic failure of Israeli operational security or the provision of real-time intelligence from sources that have penetrated Israeli military communications. Either explanation points to vulnerabilities that cannot be easily remedied and that will make future operations equally dangerous. Meanwhile, Tel Aviv itself is receiving what analysts have described as the Gaza treatment under Iranian missile bombardment. For decades, it was Palestinians, Lebanese, and Syrians who lived under the constant threat of Israeli bombs falling from the sky without warning. Now, for the first time in Israel's history, its largest city experiences what those populations have endured for generations. The sirens that wail across Tel Aviv are not occasional interruptions, but constant companions, reminders that the protective bubble that Israelis believe surrounded them has been punctured irreparably. The censorship that Israeli military authorities have imposed on reporting about damage from Iranian strikes tells its own story. If the Iron Dome and other defensive systems were truly intercepting 90 to 95% of incoming missiles, as Israeli officials claim, there would be abundant footage of successful interceptions lighting up the night sky. Instead, there is silence, suppression, and the occasional video that escapes the censorship net showing devastation that contradicts every official claim. An Indian journalist who was trapped in Israel for several days and has now returned home confirms what independent observers have suspected. He witnessed buildings and their occupants literally vaporized by Iranian missile strikes, saw at least 3 structures disappear from the horizon in single attacks, and noted that nobody emerged alive from 4 residential homes that were struck in one neighborhood alone. The official Israeli claim that only 1 person has died in the entire Iranian bombardment is so absurd that it insults the intelligence of anyone with access to alternative information sources. The journalist confirms hundreds of casualties, destruction that spans military and civilian infrastructure alike, and a population living in constant terror. The gap between official narrative and observable reality has never been wider, and that gap itself becomes evidence of how badly the situation has deteriorated for Israel. Trump's behavior on social media provides perhaps the clearest window into the desperation that has gripped the American leadership. His posts on Truth Social have become increasingly unhinged, grasping at any possible pretext to claim victory and justify withdrawal. When Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian offered a perfectly reasonable diplomatic statement explaining that Iran would not attack Arab countries as long as their territory was not used to attack Iran, Trump immediately distorted this into a claim that Iran had apologized to Middle Eastern countries. This deliberate misrepresentation was so transparently false that President Pezeshkian had to post clarifying statements on Twitter explaining exactly what he had actually said. The Iranian position, expressed clearly and consistently, is straightforward. The Islamic Republic of Iran has always insisted on preserving and continuing friendly relations with regional governments based on good neighborliness and mutual respect for national sovereignty and territorial integrity. This does not deny Iran's inherent right to defend itself against military aggression from the United States and the Zionist regime. Iran resists firmly until the last breath and defense of its country. Iranian defensive operations target exclusively those targets and installations that are the origin and source of aggressive actions against the Iranian nation, and these are considered legitimate targets. There is nothing in this statement that could possibly be interpreted as an apology by any honest reader. Iran has consistently maintained that it is not fighting against the Arab world in general, targeting only American and Israeli interests that aggress against it. This is exactly what the Iranian foreign minister communicated to his Qatari counterpart in a recent diplomatic phone call. One cannot blame Iran if these Arab countries have permitted the massive presence of American troops and military installations on their national soil. They should have foreseen that this would happen eventually if these bases were used to attack Iran. Trump's desperate attempt to twist this reasonable diplomatic communication into evidence of Iranian surrender reveals the psychological state of a man who realizes he has trapped himself in a quagmire from which no honorable exit exists. Publicly, he wants to maintain his habitual tough guy posture, the image he has cultivated for decades of someone who never backs down. But if you read carefully between the lines of his social media messages, if you analyze the rhetoric he uses and the formulations he chooses, you understand immediately that he is profoundly frightened by the turn events are taking. The destruction that Iranian forces have inflicted on American military assets across the region compounds Trump's problems exponentially. Yesterday, Iranian precision strikes completely destroyed an American Patriot missile site in the United Arab Emirates. The images circulating show the massive extent of damage that these methodical Iranian attacks have caused to supposedly impregnable American military installations. This is not merely equipment damage. This is the systematic dismantling of the defensive architecture that was supposed to protect American and Allied assets throughout the Gulf. The radar systems that provided early warning for Israeli and Gulf state defenses have been systematically targeted and destroyed. Israeli Channel 14 has reported that the primary reason for the catastrophic failure of warning systems protecting Israeli population centers is that Iran has completely destroyed the American third-generation radars deployed in Jordan and across the Persian Gulf, effectively blinding Israeli defenses. When the eyes of a military force are destroyed, everything that depends on those eyes becomes vulnerable. The Iron Dome cannot intercept what it cannot see coming. The Patriot batteries cannot engage targets they cannot track. The entire defensive architecture collapses when its sensory foundation is eliminated. The revelations about Russian assistance to Iran add another dimension to Trump's desperation. According to Washington Post reporting, Russia has been sharing crucial intelligence with Iran about the exact presence of American troops and other military assets in the Gulf, providing precise GPS coordinates that enable Iranian targeting of previously hidden installations. Iran successfully struck a Saudi base that was also being used secretly by American troops. How exactly did the Iranians know this highly confidential detail about American presence in that base? Russian intelligence, systematically shared with Thrawn, provides the answer. When a journalist attempted to question Trump about this Russian assistance to Iran, his reaction was revealing of his impotence. Rather than addressing the substance of the question, Trump responded with defensive aggression, dismissing it as a stupid question and demanding to change the subject. He refuses to discuss Russian-Iranian cooperation because he knows he can do nothing substantive against the powerful Russians who are outmaneuvering him strategically. The man who claimed he would make America respected again cowers from even acknowledging the assistance that Russia provides to his declared enemy. Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev has publicly stated what many Arab leaders are privately thinking. The Arab countries of the Gulf have permitted the installation of American bases on their national territory. Naively, they expected to receive military protection from these bases. How wrong and ridiculous that expectation was. The United States simply uses them as human shields while really protecting only one country, which is Israel. They should think long and seriously about whether they really need these American bases on their soil. They do not constitute protection. On the contrary, they are a direct threat to national security. This is an extremely strong diplomatic statement that should make all Arab leaders think deeply about the bargain they have made with Washington. The American bases that were supposed to provide security have instead made their hosts targets of Iranian retaliation. The sophisticated defense systems they purchased have proven inadequate against Iranian capabilities. The alliance with Washington that was supposed to guarantee their survival now threatens their destruction. The confirmation that Kuwait has shot down 3 American F-15 fighters adds another surreal dimension to this unfolding disaster. The fighters were not shot down by Iran, but by Kuwait, supposedly an American ally in this conflict. American pilots now declare openly that they would rather fly over Iran than over Kuwait. They believe it is safer to fly over enemy territory than over Allied territory. This astonishing reversal captures something profound about how completely the situation has deteriorated for American forces in the region. The coordination between Iran and its regional allies demonstrates a level of strategic sophistication that American planners clearly failed to anticipate. The Houthis of Yemen threaten to close the Red Sea to shipping. Hezbollah in Lebanon rains rockets on northern Israel while executing devastating ambushes against Israeli ground forces. Iraqi resistance groups attack American bases throughout their country. All of these actors form a united front of resistance that exponentially complicates the strategic calculations of Washington and Tel Aviv. Trump thought he was confronting Iran isolated and alone. He has discovered that he faces an entire axis of regional resistance that is determined and increasingly effective militarily. The assumption that shock and awe against Iranian territory would cause the collapse of this network has proven spectacularly wrong. Instead, the regional allies have intensified their operations, demonstrating solidarity with Iran and imposing costs on American and Israeli forces that neither anticipated. Hezbollah's demand this morning that Israeli residents of the north evacuate their homes and cities immediately because massive rocket barges were about to be launched represents the new reality that Israeli civilians must now accept. They are no longer secure in their homes. The protective shield that was supposed to make Israel a safe haven for Jews worldwide has been penetrated. The promise of security that the Zionist project offered has proven hollow when confronted with an adversary willing and able to strike back effectively. The residents of Tel Aviv now complain publicly about the complete non-functioning of the alert system that is supposed to warn them of incoming attacks. They received 5 alarms in 13 hours, which means at least 5 missiles from Iran, probably double that number in reality, plus additional alarms from Hezbollah rockets from Lebanon. Yet, Western media and propaganda echo chambers continue telling the public that Iran's firing capacity is weakening progressively. This is the inverse of observable reality. Propaganda is so disconnected from facts that it insults the intelligence of anyone paying attention. Independent American military analysts now estimate that Tel Aviv is literally receiving the Gaza treatment under systematic Iranian bombardment. This comparison should make anyone who has seen the images of total destruction in Gaza shudder. The buildings that disappear from the horizon under Iranian missile strikes, the residents who live in constant terror of the next alarm, the infrastructure damage that accumulates day after day. All of this represents a historic reversal in the balance of power in the Middle East. For decades, it was Palestinians, Lebanese, and Syrians who suffered Israeli aggression without being able to defend themselves effectively. Today, for the first time, Israel tastes its own medicine and discovers what it means to live under the constant threat of destruction from the sky. This inversion is profoundly significant and marks a historic turning point in regional power dynamics. The narrative of Israeli invincibility, cultivated over decades through propaganda and genuine military achievements, shatters against the reality of Iranian missiles that cannot be stopped, and Hezbollah ambushes that force Israeli soldiers to flee in shame. Trump's increasingly erratic declarations on Truth Social, his pathetic attempts to distort Iranian statements to claim imaginary victories, his refusal to answer questions about Russian military aid to Iran. All of this paints the portrait of a man who progressively realizes he has committed the most serious strategic error of his presidency. He thought that bombing Iran would be like bombing Syria or Yemen, weakened countries that could not respond effectively. He has discovered at his expense that Iran is a major regional power with sophisticated military capabilities, unshakable determination, and powerful strategic allies like Russia and China who provide intelligence and diplomatic support. The crews of American aircraft carriers patrolling the Gulf for months without touching land, exhausted and demoralized, now wonder exactly why they risk their lives. The American pilots who prefer flying over Iran to flying over allied Kuwait testify to the total absurdity of this war. The families of dead soldiers whose coffins begin arriving in the United States draped in American flags demand accountability for the real objectives of this disastrous military operation. Trump can no longer indefinitely hide the growing American losses, the destruction of expensive military equipment, the manifest failure to subdue Iran despite weeks of intensive bombardment. Each day that passes without the decisive victory he promised is a day that compounds his political vulnerability. Each Iranian missile that strikes an American or Israeli target demonstrates the hollow nature of his threats. Each successful Hezbollah ambush reveals the limits of Israeli military capability. The revelations now emerging about the Epstein files add another dimension to this debacle. The Department of Justice has just uploaded new FBI documents that were missing from the initial releases. These documents contain unverified but extremely serious allegations of sexual assault against Donald Trump personally, specifically detailing testimony from a woman who accuses Trump and Jeffrey Epstein of sexually assaulting her decades ago when she was just a minor teenager. Is it a coincidence that Trump launched a massive war against Iran exactly when these explosive documents were beginning to emerge publicly? Many analysts think not, seeing this as a deliberate strategy of media distraction. While Trump sinks into his lies and desperate diversions, Iran continues methodically its legitimate retaliatory operations against American-Israeli aggression. Each Iranian missile that strikes an American or Israeli base, each drone that destroys a military installation, each Patriot air defense system that is reduced to smoking scrap. All of this demonstrates the catastrophic failure of the Trumpian strategy that thought it could intimidate and subdue Iran through a simple demonstration of brutal force. Iran has proven to the entire world that it will never submit to imperialist intimidation, that it will defend its national sovereignty until the last breath, as President Peshkian promised, and that it possesses the military, technological, and strategic capabilities to inflict unsustainable costs on its aggressors. The current situation in Tel Aviv, where residents live in constant terror of alert sirens, where the early warning system no longer functions correctly because Iran destroyed the American radars that supported it, where buildings literally disappear from the horizon under precision Iranian missile strikes. All of this represents a historic reversal in the balance of power in the Middle East. The erratic declarations from Trump, his pathetic attempts to claim victories that do not exist, his refusal to address inconvenient questions about Russian assistance to Iran, all reveal a man who has lost control of a situation he himself created. He launched this war expecting quick triumph and political benefit. He has instead trapped himself in a quagmire comparable to Vietnam or Afghanistan, a conflict that cannot be won militarily, that imposes escalating costs daily, and that offers no exit that does not involve acknowledgement of failure. I want to hear your thoughts on the retreat of Israeli soldiers from Lebanon and Trump's increasingly desperate social media behavior. Do you believe the American public will eventually demand accountability for this disastrous war? What does the shameful flight of Israeli soldiers from Hezbollah ambush tell us about the true state of Israeli military capability? Drop your comments below. The psychological dimension of this conflict deserves particular attention because it reveals the fragility that lies beneath the surface of apparent military strength. When Israeli soldiers abandon their comrades and flee across the sea rather than attempting rescue, something fundamental has broken in the morale of those forces. The confidence that comes from decades of victory has been replaced by a fear that spreads through units like contagion. Each soldier who witnesses comrades fall to Hezbollah ambushes, each pilot who sees his wingman shot down, each crew member who watches missiles strike despite all defensive efforts carries that trauma forward into future operations. The Israeli military has never before faced an adversary capable of imposing such costs simultaneously on multiple fronts. In previous conflicts, Israel could concentrate its overwhelming firepower against one enemy at a time, defeating each in sequence before turning to the next. Now, Iranian missiles fall on Tel Aviv while Hezbollah rockets strike the north, while Iraqi resistance groups attack supply lines, while forces threaten maritime approaches. The multi-front war that Israeli strategists always feared has materialized, and the responses they prepared have proven inadequate to the challenge. The destruction of American early warning radars across the Gulf represents perhaps the most consequential military development of this conflict. These systems worth billions of dollars and requiring years to develop and deploy provided the foundation upon which all other defensive capabilities depended. Without early warning, even the most sophisticated interceptor missiles cannot protect their targets effectively. The reaction time simply does not exist when threats are detected only at the last moment. Iran understood this vulnerability and targeted it with precision that reflects either brilliant indigenous intelligence work or assistance from allies with sophisticated surveillance capabilities. The Russian dimension of Iranian intelligence capabilities cannot be overstated. Moscow maintains one of the world's most sophisticated satellite reconnaissance networks, developed over decades specifically to monitor American military movements globally. The constellation of Russian observation satellites can track every American ship, every American aircraft, every American deployment in real time. This capability, now shared with Thrawn through the strategic partnership that links these nations, effectively eliminates the information advantage that American forces have relied upon in every conflict since the Cold War. American military doctrine assumes technological superiority that provides commanders with better information than their adversaries possess. When that assumption fails, when the adversary knows exactly where American assets are located, while American forces operate with degraded awareness due to destroyed radar systems, the entire foundation of operational planning collapses. The strikes on bases that were supposed to be secret, on installations that were hidden from public view, on assets whose locations were closely guarded, demonstrate that Iranian targeting now operates with near-perfect intelligence. The financial dimensions of this conflict compound the military challenges exponentially. Each Patriot missile that is fired costs millions of dollars. Each replacement radar system costs billions. Each F-15 that crashes, whether shot down by enemies or allies, represents $100 million of destroyed capability that cannot be quickly replaced. Meanwhile, Iranian drones cost tens of thousands of dollars. Iranian missiles cost millions at most, and the asymmetric mathematics favored the defender against the attacker in ways that American war planners never adequately considered. The domestic political consequences for Trump grow more severe with each passing day. He launched this war promising quick victory and expecting political benefits from the rally around the flag effect that typically follows American military action. Instead, he faces a prolonged conflict with mounting casualties, destroyed equipment, and no clear path to the objectives he proclaimed. The Epstein revelations that are now emerging add another layer of political vulnerability at exactly the moment when he can least afford distraction from the war he is losing. The American public, war-weary after decades of Middle Eastern adventures that produce nothing but casualties and bills, shows little enthusiasm for another conflict without clear purpose or achievable objectives. Polling indicates that only a small minority supports ground invasion, and even air operations enjoy less support than Trump anticipated. Each coffin that returns from the Gulf, each family that mourns a lost soldier, each community that buries its children creates opposition that no amount of propaganda can neutralize. If you found this analysis valuable, subscribe right now and hit that notification bell. Share this video with everyone who needs to understand the reality of what is happening in this conflict beyond the propaganda narratives that Western media broadcasts. I'm Michael Harris. Israeli soldiers are retreating from Lebanon in shame. American defense systems are being systematically destroyed across the Gulf. And Trump posts desperately on social media, searching for any excuse to claim victory and escape the quagmire he has created. Iran and its allies have demonstrated capabilities that neither Washington nor Tel Aviv anticipated. And the consequences of this strategic failure will reshape the Middle East for generations. The era of unchallenged American and Israeli military dominance is ending, and what replaces it will be written by those who had the courage to resist when resistance seemed impossible. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and understand that the retreat you are witnessing is not a temporary setback, but the beginning of a fundamental transformation in regional power dynamics. I'll see you in the next